Hello, Ian here with another tutorial. This time I'm going to talk you through how I created the generic spell for my magic sound effects pack. Now this is the first of a few different spells we did, and the reason we did these was just to give users kind of some more generic sounds that they can use in lots of different ways, rather than being tied to like specific elements or themes like the other spells. There's not always times when you need like a fire spell or a ice spell. Sometimes you just want a magic spell, and that's what this is supposed to cover. So let's take a listen. Now with this spell, I really wanted to kind of have some more classic magic sounds in there. Something a little bit more tonal, something that kind of sounds a little bit like old-fashioned magic, but combine that with a really, really solid foundation of other sounds that really fill out the body of the spell, so that it still has that kind of modern impactfulness, but with some kind of old-fashioned twists. Now I've divided the sounds into high and mid and low sounds, and I've put the mid and low sounds just in the same group for now, just because some of the sounds kind of share the frequency ranges. Rather than starting with the high sounds, I think we're going to start with the low and mid sounds this time, just because there's some really crucial sounds in there. And perhaps the most crucial is this magic rise sound. This is an occasion where I've actually used a synth and done the notes all myself. I've used Massive from Native Instruments, and I found this patch called Chemicals, which I really like. On its own, it doesn't sound fantastic if you hear individual notes. It sounds kind of like science fiction-y, but when you use the whole tone scale, it suddenly has this nice magical sound. Now for those who don't know, the whole tone scale is a really fantastic scale to use for magic sounds, especially the kind of more old-fashioned magic sounds. The way you do the whole tone scale is you just basically keep playing up a tone. There's no semitones in there, it just keeps going up a tone. And it kind of has that flashback quality, you know, it's kind of like when in old films when they think back to old memories. And I would always use these kind of sounds sparingly. If you overuse them, the spell just becomes super cheesy. And unless that's what you're going for, then just don't. But when you use it subtly and combine it with some other sounds that are less kind of old-fashioned, then it works really nicely. The reason I've had this rising up in pitch as it does is just to build towards the moment of impact. And if you look at the piano roll here, there's nothing too complicated going on. I've not played anything too precise, I've not quantized it. I've just done these kind of 4 groups of rising notes that build towards the moment of impact. Okay, next we have this shimmer sound. Now for this I use some delay. I've put some diffusion delay on that sound just to give it a little bit more echo, just so we have that nice long fade out that kind of sells the power of the magic spell. And I didn't really use this for any particular reason other than just to add an extra texture into that moment of impact. Like this magic rise sound before, it's a more tonal sound, which I've not used so much in the other magic spells that I've done. But that's nice, it kind of sets this spell apart, and it just adds an extra frequency range into that impact. Okay, next we have this wind sound. I really, really like this sound. To me, it kind of reminds me of those old wind machines that they used in old films to kind of replicate the sound of wind. Especially it reminds me of like the house going through the sky in The Wizard of Oz, that kind of sound. And I really like it, especially when I combine it with this original Magic Rise sound. I feel like those two complement each other really nice, kind of because they're sounds that kind of harken back to the same era. I've given this a fairly strong impact, you know, it comes in quite suddenly, and then just gradually fades away as the spell continues. I didn't really need to continue to rise up to that moment of impact because it's quite a strong sound anyway, and I didn't want it to overpower everything else. So just having it there, come in at the start, and then fade out to be replaced by other sounds works nicely. Okay, next we have this fireball sound. Quite a subtle sound, nothing too massive. It's just there to kind of add an extra texture into that moment of impact. It also kind of serves to let the listener know that the moment of impact is just about to happen, because it does have a very, very short build up to its kind of peak. And now we have this energy blast sound. As you can hear, I added quite a bit of delay onto this. It's not diffusion delay, it's just standard kind of delay. And the reason I've done that is just to really give it a kind of otherworldly, magical vibe. The original sound, actually, I believe I reversed it. If I reverse this back, and I'll do that by going to Audio Processes, Reverse, and I'll click New Version, so it doesn't reverse this one as well. If you listen to this, and I'll remove the delay as well. I think that was the original sound. It's kind of like a laser blast kind of thing from a sci-fi. But when you reverse it, you get this nice, long build. And there's some really nice bassy elements in there at the start of it. It starts really low and then builds up. I really like that because it just kind of sells the power of the spell. Having these like sub-bass sounds at the start really gives you the impression that this spell is powerful. And adding the delay on just sells that magical element. Okay, finally we have this spell attack sound. This is a kind of more generic magic spell sound that I've kind of layered on top of everything else. Kind of like the sounds in Harry Potter when they fire off their spells. I like it. It's not a super high quality sound, but you can't really tell that when you combine it with everything else. It's got an almost kind of electrical vibe to it, which isn't really a problem because we don't have other electricity sounds in there. So it's not going to confuse the listener. It's just like we've got this fireball sound in here earlier on, but it's subtle enough that it's not going to confuse people. Basically, this sound is in here, as with some of the others, just to kind of give that moment of impact a bit more of a punch. Okay, so that's the mid and low sounds. Let's move on to the high sounds. First, we've got these chimes. And these are just in here to fill out the top end of the sound, just to give the sound a nice magical glow. They're kind of there throughout, just to kind of add to the higher texture. Now we have this rain stick. Now, I was quite hesitant to use the sound at first because on its own you can very clearly hear that it's a rain stick, which is one of those tubes with kind of like little bits in them that you kind of shake around to make this sound. But when you combine it with everything else, you can't really hear that so clearly. It just kind of adds to the texture. And I really like this sound because it's got a very definite start, then it kind of goes down and then builds up again. And that follows the shape of the spell really nicely. The whole idea of these spells is that you have your start, which is kind of strong. It's got the sound of, the magician waving the wand. And then you have this build up to an even bigger moment of impact. And this just covers that structure really nicely. I also really like the quality of these sounds. They almost sound like they've got like a built-in delay, which I suppose is just the things falling through the tube and taking a while for it to happen. It kind of does have this magical quality. You can hear all these individual sounds all laid on top of each other. Just makes a really, really, really beautiful texture. Next we have this time warp sound. Kind of similar to that wind sound we listened to earlier. This is one of those that kind of oscillates kind of up and down. And I really like it. It's just kind of to add to the body of the sound. It kind of fits in with that theme. That kind of slightly old-fashioned theme. Now it is a more modern sound. It does kind of sound of sci-fi, but I think when you combine it with the wind sound, you'll see what I mean. It does have that kind of like old-fashioned wind sound to it. Kind of sort of sounds like wind howling over the top of the other wind sound. And I've actually used a filter here to actually filter out the lower pitch sounds. Because if you listen to it without the filter on, you can hear quite a lot of low pitch sounds. And when I tried that, it just took over the mix too much. It just kind of muddied things up. I have my other sounds that you've already heard that are there to fill in the low end. This just kind of felt muddy. I wanted something that sat on top, added some nice kind of oscillating texture to the sound. And finally we have this shine sound. This is basically there just to serve as a nice little high-pitched bit that rings out at the moment of impact. Sorry, I've added some diffusion delay onto it for the same reason to everything else, just to give it a nice fade out. And I think it works really nicely with the magic rice sound that we heard earlier. Now, it's a very subtle sound, and you could argue that some of these sounds are quiet enough that you could just take them out and you wouldn't really notice a massive difference. But it's just there, just to fill out those top end textures, just to make sure that I'm covering all the frequencies and giving the sound enough body and enough presence to sound powerful. Okay, let's take a listen to the spell one more time. Okay, thanks for listening. I hope this was useful.